93 WIBC, WIBC.com. If you have an iPhone, new operating system will be available pretty soon, an iPad as well. iOS 7 has been released to a handful of people, though, at Apple's event. It's the Worldwide Developers Conference that Apple is holding in San Francisco. And one of the folks who has gotten an up-close look at iOS 7 is Jonathan Huer. He is the Director of Emerging Technologies and Media Development at Ball State, and he's in San Francisco as part of the conference and has been good enough to join us right now. Jonathan, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. iOS 7 for iPhone and iPad is different than the current version of iOS. How? What have you seen so far?
It's pretty different in every way. There's the design language to talk about it, but there's also a lot of great stuff under the hood. Primarily, it's flatter, and that sounds kind of weird if you're not an iPhone user, but there's a lot of aspects of the iPhone that are designed to represent images of things we're familiar with. Perhaps the most ironic one is the podcast app, which has a reel-to-reel, old-fashioned audio system in the background, which, let's be honest, kids today have no clue what that even is.
Yeah,
what they've done is they've removed all of those kinds of representations from the interface, and they've replaced it with something that's a lot cleaner, a lot flatter, and it at the same time, though, by doing this parallax thing that they're doing, it's really cool. So it has a different effect to it, and really what they're trying to do is just get down to the root of what you need in an interface. As an app developer, one thing that we work a lot with the students and with the developers and everyone at Ball State is really trying to get down to the essence of what's important. And so what they've done is they've really gone down to what is most important. And a lot of that is in beautiful typography and really well-rendered text and very simple icons. And especially on a device like an iPhone, the screen is relatively small compared to a computer or even an iPad. And so you want to utilize every pixel on that screen the best you possibly can.
So this sounds like a pretty big change, and you're right about the icons. I'm looking at the notes icon, for example, little notepad that looks like a yellow legal pad. Well, why do we need a yellow legal pad if we're using a doggone iPhone? But you make a good point about the reel-to-reel player. My kids had to ask me what the reel-to-reel player was. They kind of sort of knew, but the only reason they knew is because of the profession that I'm in, and I've probably explained to them all the old technology that we don't use anymore.
Yes, it's something that's been talked about for a while, and it just wasn't consistent. Some apps were really designed to be apps, and other apps were designed to look like the thing that they were replacing. And this has been something that's been around in computers from the beginning. I mean, most people, now we just think of files and folders as not that big of a deal, but it was originally designed for folders to represent a folder like you would use in a file cabinet. And so that's a pretty common design mechanism that's used. But now, most people have a smartphone of some kind, whether it's Android or iOS or Windows or BlackBerry. And so we're ready to move beyond that. And I think Apple, what they were trying to do here and did fairly well, is go back to the device layer and say, like, okay, how are users going to use this? And really focus on what is needed in that interface and really just flattened it all out.
Just so I don't sound like an idiot, is it iOS or is it iOS? Does it matter one way or the other?
iOS is how I say it, but I think a lot of people still just refer to it as the iPhone.
This is the iPhone system, okay. But, yeah, I mean, iOS 7 is going to be out in a few months. Now, this is a beta version. How much longer do we have to wait for this to be available to the general public?
Apple hasn't said exactly, but, the fall historically has meant, around September usually. But they haven't said specifically on this. And it is available to the developers now because I think that a lot of the public doesn't recognize there's a period that you have to go through where you try to make sure that you as a developer that your app is ready for it. So I'm actually running it on the phone I'm talking to you on right now, ironically. And so finding little things here and there that are different, that are changed. And a lot of what this conference is about is in great detail, obviously under non-disclosure agreements, but in great detail going through a lot of the changes and talking about what developers need to do behind the scenes to make sure that when it does come out to the public in the fall, that it's a good, solid experience for everybody. And I have a few apps that just aren't working quite right on the beta, and that's the development process. And I think a lot of people don't realize, the magic of these devices per se is not just Apple, but there are a lot of developers who spend hours and hours and hours in building these apps, and it takes a lot of time to make sure that they work the way that we want them to, and to make sure that they work the way a user expects them to, and really pay attention to all of those little details. And so that's what the beta period allows, is it allows the developers to find those mistakes and fix everything and get it updated before it comes out to the public in the fall.
Talking to Jonathan Huer, Director of Emerging Technologies and Media Development at Ball State. He is at the Apple Worldwide Developer Conference, where the iOS 7 operating system for iPhone and iPad has been revealed to them. They are the guinea pigs, essentially, before this comes out in the fall. Before we get to upgrading to iOS 7 a little bit later, for those who have an Android device, because Android has played catch-up in the market somewhat. Catch-up, I should say, not ketchup. Catch-up in the market somewhat. How does iOS 7 compare to what Android is offering right now? And do you think this is going to entice someone to make the switch, as Apple would like?
It might. I think that fundamentally Android devices and iOS devices are different, and that's where it's great that there's a lot of options in the marketplace. Really what happens is you buy into an ecosystem. And so if you're on the Android side and you have a bunch of Android apps and whatnot, those I don't think will ever work on the iPhone and vice versa. But if you are looking for a lot of customization and a lot of options and things like that, the Android marketplace does have, the Android product line among all the different manufacturers, it has a lot of really cool options. On the iPhone, there's some really great stuff, but it is also, it is what you get. And there's a lot less customization, and there's a lot less little details that you can change. I think for most people, they never go into that level of intimate engagement with their device where they are trying to, change really tiny little details. And so I don't, it really comes down to this personal choice. Personally, I use an iPhone, but ironically, the other two developers from Ball State that are here with me at the conference both have Android phones. So, it really comes down to personal choice. And in our office, we try to develop for Android and iOS as much as possible. But they're different devices, and they have different strengths and weaknesses, and it really comes down to what you want. And a lot of the strength of Apple is that they make a lot of decisions for you and say, okay, here's the device, and here's how it works, and we made it as simple as possible. Whereas on the Android side, there's obviously a lot wider variety of devices, and those devices come from different manufacturers who've tweaked Android here and there to make it work in different ways that works for them and works with those devices. And so it really just comes down to choice. I can tell you personally, my Facebook wall has been filled with a lot of comments, both pro and con of what people think of it. But I think like anything else, it'll take a while to adjust. But what Apple did particularly well, in my experience, I've literally been using it now for about 16 hours, so not that long. There hasn't been a learning curve, and that's what sometimes happens with devices. If you switch from iOS to Android, or even if you go from one version of an operating system to another, you as a user, you're not a developer, you're not a computer science person. You just need to, send a message, and you need to make a call, and you need to check your email. And so you want to make sure that any changes don't interfere with those basic functions. And what's been great so far, from what I can tell at least, I haven't found anything that really surprised me as far as like, oh no, how do I do this? Or where did that button go? Or how did this get moved? It's really been a seamless transition in terms of everything being where I needed it to be, and just continuing to be really intuitive and easy to use.
When iOS 7 is available to the public, will this be an automatic upgrade to existing iPhones, iPads? Do you have to have a certain level of iPhone to get an automatic upgrade?
Yes, you have to have. I don't want to misspeak about that. I can't remember what they said in the keynote what it was. I think it's the iPhone 4 and higher, the 5th gen iPod Touch, the iPad Mini, and I don't remember which larger iPad. But it's not a device. I mean, I'm running it on my iPhone 4S. So as far as I can tell, they didn't. I was worried that I wouldn't be able to run it, but I've been able to run it no problem. So, and you'll just have the option to download it one day.